Okay, welcome to our continuing discussion on the instruments of the orchestra. Today we're going to look at the percussion family. And the percussion family is classified just like all the others by the way they produce sound. There are three main ways that all percussion instruments produce sound. You can hit them, shake them, or scrape them. So hitting them, scraping, or shaking them. Most of them are played by simply hitting them, so they're the most fun if you like violence. So it's a bit problematic in covering the percussion family because it is a unique family in that it is the smallest family in the orchestra by number of players. This orchestra has four. There's usually only about 2 to 5 percussionists in an orchestra. However, despite their small size by number of people, they play more instruments than any other family. There are literally cabinets of instruments that these guys can play. And so your standard professional percussionist is a master of quite a few instruments. The one guy that usually specializes in the orchestra, we're going to learn these are called the timpani or kettle drums. And he's the one guy that kind of specializes in that. And the rest of them move around to the various different percussion instruments. Now we are going to classify percussion by two main families, and that is the pitched percussion, which are capable of playing individual notes. And then you have your non-pitched, which can't really play tones. They can't play actual melodic notes. So an example of that, being non-pitched, that is the snare drum. The snare drum lacks the capability of being able to play a melodic phrase. So ask yourself, basically, can it play the melody to Mary Had a Little Lamb? And if it can't do that, then you have to classify it as non-pitched. The snare drum is called the snare drum because on the bottom of the instrument, let's get this out of the way here. Let's pull up a picture of the snare drum. The snares are on the bottom of the instrument, and they're called snares because they look like this. They apparently resemble the snare inside a trap, but they're little wiry, little curved pieces of wires that press up against the bottom head of the drum, and these can actually be turned on or turned off, and there's a little switch on the side. It's called the snare strainer, but you turn that switch on and off, and you can change whether or not the snares are actually in contact with the bottom head or not. So when you play on the top head, it causes the bottom head to vibrate too, and those snares rattle up against the bottom. So you can hear that the snare gets that gunshot type sound when the snares are activated. So that's how the snares are played with the snare drumsticks. You see those primarily used to play what we call the drum set or trap set that you use in rock and roll and other styles. The bass drum, unlike the snare, unlike the trap set, is not in front of the player on the floor. Instead, they play it individually like this, usually with soft mallets, and the bass drum just plays a really low sound, kind of a boomy sound, and you can the harder you hit it, the more of a like thunderclap sound that it has. But this is what one sounds like. Okay, you have a few other instruments here. Now, usually when you say cymbals and you're talking about the orchestra, this is the one that you are referring to, which is called the crash cymbals. And they're called that because you crash them together and then they ring out. Now, the excerpt that this gentleman's playing from is actually from a piece of music that normally would be played with the entire orchestra. And what he's going to be doing is playing them, but then pressing them up against his chest to mute the sound, because that's what it calls for in the music. So sometimes they do, crash them together and let the sound ring out, but in this case, he's trying to mute the sound almost immediately after he plays them. Okay, there are different kinds of cymbals in the orchestra. You do have what's called a suspended cymbal, which is suspended by, if I can type here, suspended by a metal pole that it rests on. And these can be played with mallets, as you can see. They're also used in drum sets, as you can see there. And there's all different kinds of mallets you can play them with, all different kinds of effects you can get out of it. There's even different kinds of cymbals, some with even like rivets in them to make them kind of sizzle a little bit. So cymbals are a quite large subfamily there. Notice all the instruments we've heard so far are classified as non-pitch. There's no exact tones coming out of them. And there's ones that most of you probably already know, but hopefully most of you know what the triangle is. Of course, it's called that because it's triangle shaped, but this is another non-pitch because although it does make kind of a ring sound, it can't play melodic stuff. Alright, and have you noticed also that it's been the same guy playing all these instruments? That's because one percussionist will be skilled, like I said, in quite a few of these instruments. Now we are going to look now at the first pitched percussion, and this is the one that actually was one of the first percussion instruments to be used widely in the orchestra. These are called kettle drums or timpani. By the way, if you're talking about one, you say, hey, look at that timpani. If you're referring to the plural tense where you're referring to more than one, you don't add an S on the end. You say, hey, look at those timpani. So please note that if you're ever discussing them. You can see why they're called kettle drums too. It looks like a giant kettle with a single drum head put on top. And this drum head can actually be tuned either via these bolts here, or some modern timpani actually have a little foot pedal that adjusts the pitch. But they do produce individual pitches. However, the timpani are seen as a single instrument. So there's going to be about 2 to 5 of these guys, and each one can produce a different tone. And here's what they sound like. And you've probably heard them do, like rolls for when they're about to announce the winner of a contest and stuff like that. Now, there are a subfamily of pitched percussion called the Mallet Instruments, and the highest pitched one of those is called the Glockenspiel. Glocken in German means bells, and Spiel means to play, so they are bells being played. And as you can see, they're made out of metal keys. Please do not call this a xylophone, because as we're going to see in a minute, xylophones are made out of wood. Glockenspiels also usually sit up on a table. They rarely have their own little stand, unlike marimbas and xylophones do. They're usually played with metal or hard plastic mallets, and they have a very ringy tone to them. So here is the Glockenspiel. By the way, they're also sometimes just called the bells or orchestral bells. And that was a cute little melody there by Mozart. Mozart, we're going to see, had quite a gift for melody. All right, now we're going to look at the xylophone, the instrument that everybody wants to call the Glockenspiel. As you can see, it's rather larger. It has wooden keys. It's usually played with hard plastic mallets, and it has a very woody tone to it. But notice the tone doesn't last very long. As soon as the note sounds, it pretty much stops. And that's one way to tell it from the marimba, its big sister, we're going to look at here in a minute. So here's what a xylophone sounds like. Okay, so we just listened to the xylophone, and as promised, we're going to listen to its big sister here, the marimba. The marimba, you can see, is significantly larger. The keys are longer, and that's because it's lower pitched. It also has bigger resonator tubes underneath it. And unlike the xylophone and glockenspiel, it's played usually with soft mallets, which are usually made out of yarn. So we're going to hear what the marimba sounds like. Okay, now we're going to look at a bit of an unusual pitched percussion instrument. The pitched percussion instrument that we're about to look at is called the cellist. The cellist is a keyboard-looking instrument, and therefore it's real tempting to call it a keyboard instrument and classify it in the same category as a piano or harpsichord, but many textbooks and many professors will tell you that it actually belongs in the percussion section. Now, percussionists don't always play it, and the reason I picked this clip here, another piece from the Harry Potter soundtrack, is that you will notice it's not in the percussion section. They actually put it front and center. So, and this guy right here, because this part is particularly demanding on the cellist, this guy's probably a pianist by trade. So they needed someone who could play it with a little more skill than the basic keyboard skills that percussionists are taught. So you'll hear why John Williams chose the cellist for the Hedwig's theme, which is the white owl in the Harry Potter movies. And you've probably heard this theme before if you've seen any of the Harry Potter movies. Despite it being the theme for the owl, a lot of people think this is like the main theme for Harry Potter movies. It basically is a glockenspiel inside a wooden box, and when you press the keys, it actually hits a little hammer onto the glockenspiel. And there's a pedal down here they can press down that allows the bells to ring out longer than they would, because normally once you lift your finger, it would mute the sound by applying a damper to it. That's a very similar mechanism as what we have in the piano, but pianos have strings inside of them. So if I asked you to classify the cellist on a quiz or something like that, please note it is a pitched percussion instrument, because you're actually hitting the metal bars on the inside of the instrument. Remember, that's how we classify percussion. That's one of the ways, is that they hit things. So let's take a listen here to this and hear what a cellist sounds like.
The first little piece in this suite is called Hedwig's Flight, and people who know the book and the film will know that Hedwig is that wonderfully beautiful white owl. So Hedwig needed some music that was gossamer, light, and so I thought cellist, which is the little keyboard instrument. It's like a mini piano, and each note on it, you play it like a piano, but each note is kind of like a bell. And it has a pedal like a piano, so if you play 5 quick notes and put the pedal down, you get this beautiful little blur. It's kind of like a bird feather that just would float.
So that's probably where you've heard the cellist before, and that is the only one that students sometimes get a little confused about when we talk about pitched percussion. There are literally hundreds of instruments in the percussion family, and I simply do not have the luxury of time to go over all of them. But the main thing I want to teach you is how to be able to classify them when you do see or hear them. And if you hit, shake, or scrape them, you know it's a percussion instrument. And if it produces a melody, then it is a pitched percussion. If it's not capable of melodic material, then it's non-pitched. So that pretty much does it for the percussion family. Our last little family of instruments, which we said before, is not actually a family that belongs within the orchestra. We're done with that now. We've got the strings, woodwinds, brass, and percussion. That's it for the orchestra. But we are going to look at keyboard instruments, and we'll see why they're not classified usually with the orchestra.